We're now in the home stretch on the Catholic teaching portion of this training, and we're just going to talk about the benefits of NFP. Now, I'm not going to mention all of them. I'm just going to mention the ones that I noticed in my marriage. So as I mentioned, this is a 2-year process. It did not happen overnight. I didn't hear about NFP and then jump up and down going, hey, this is great, I love it. It was just, to me, I thought it was kind of cool that we were charting something that was scientific. At the same time, I didn't really have any reason beyond doing it other than just, hey, it looks interesting, it looks scientific, and that's all I know. It took me about 2 years to really embrace all the virtues that came along the way. So I mentioned that I had vices before. I'm not going to mention specifically what they were, but these were habits that I have of over 22 years. Okay, NFP taught me the virtue of chastity gradually. So think about it. Dieting is periodic abstinence of food for a greater good. Okay, when we actually use NFP, we're doing the same thing just in a sexual sense. Okay, bulimia is not, though. Bulimia is a disorder, and that is indulging in food and rejecting the consequences of that food. Okay, so that's not an ordered thing to do, and that's any person in the right mind would say that someone who's bulimic has some issues. So that's kind of analogous to contraception. I want to engage in the pleasure, but I'm just going to reject the consequences later. So when it came to NFP, it made me abstain for maybe a week at a time or 10 days at a time, and I knew that if I did that, I could last a little bit longer and abstain a little bit longer. Who knows what you're going to go through in your marriage? You might have a blissful marriage. Like I mentioned, one of you could get hit by a car and be in a coma for 1.5 years, okay, or even longer. Now, are you going to abstain from sexual pleasure during that time? Doing so is an act of love, saying, you know what, this is meant to be with you, honey, and until you're well, I'm going to give this up. For you to say, pay off the doctor saying, hey, can I have 30 minutes with my wife every other night? That's kind of disgusting and wrong to do. We need to be in control of our bodies. Okay, so NFP gave me that gradual self-control. I'd been working on this for years, and to no avail. It always ended up with me falling back into the same sins over and over again. Okay, when I started using NFP, I had more and more self-control, and then about 2 years after starting NFP, I realized I don't need this stuff anymore, and I stopped doing that. Okay, that only happened through NFP. So it gives you that chastity over time. St. Dominic says, a man who governs his passions is master of his world. We must either command them or be enslaved by them. Doesn't matter whether we're talking about food, sex, anything like that. That is true about everything in life. We have to have self-control in our bodies. The second thing that I noticed that changed is that the competition in our marriage went away through time. Now, I will be the first to admit, my wife and I still struggle with these things. I still struggle with lust. Okay, I'm a scarred man. I've had problems with my sexuality in the past, and so therefore I carry these burdens with me. I'm not actively doing any of these things anymore like I used to. However, there are times when my wife and I do get into arguments about these things. We're not perfect. But at the same time, it was completely different when we were on contraception. We argued about sex all the time, okay? And the main idea is, again, the woman does all the work. We already talked about this. Meanwhile, she's risking her own health. So the pill I didn't mention before is a group 1 carcinogen. So being on hormonal contraception is not good for your body. So the pill that we were on alone had 55 negative health side effects. Some of them were, minor things like depression, which is not really minor, but you're not going to die of it the next day. And some things are pretty major problems, like increased risk of breast cancer or blood clots. Those things can kill you. Okay, and again, she gets the blame for all for the pregnancy if it were to occur. When we use NFP, again, I mentioned we work together. So I mentioned to those people, maybe you're already having premarital sex. Okay, ask yourself this question: if she's fertile tonight and tells you, hey, guess what, I'm fertile, and you don't have any contraception whatsoever, it's all gone, would you have sex with her tonight? The answer is you probably wouldn't. Okay, and if the answer is you wouldn't, then that kind of reveals your intentions. It's not as loving as you might have thought. Okay, so I tell the guys, maybe I come home from work and I really want to have sex with my wife. Okay, but I look at her chart and I'm like, wow, you're really fertile today. It's amazing how sometimes I'll just be like, you know what, honey, let's just watch a movie. Let's do something else. Let me show love to you in a non-sexual way. And that's something you do have to work on. You will have times in your marriage you have to do this. Example, when you give birth to a baby. Okay, you better be willing to wait until For 6 weeks at least. And for me, in our situation with our first son, I thought I was going to have to wait for 6 weeks. I was preparing for that, and then my wife had to get an immunization, and the doctor told us you have to wait 3 months. So that added another 6 weeks onto it. So there are going to be times in your marriage where you're going to have to give up sex, and you don't really want to. You might be staying at the in-laws house and there are thin walls. Probably not the best time to be knocking on the walls saying, I love your daughter, thank you for giving her to me, okay? So there are going to be times where you have to exercise self-control. NFP gives you the ability to do that and allows you to have better communication about this. So we talked about communication just a second ago. I want to expand on that just a little bit more. Most people that use contraception don't talk about having kids very often. Marion and I talked about it maybe once or twice for the first 3 years of our marriage. And it was just a quick conversation ending in, no, not right now. Okay, but to tell you the truth, a lot of people, let's say you get that promotion at work and you decide to change your goals, you're like, you know what, now is a good time. Let's go ahead and do this. You might not be able to if you're using hormonal contraception. The pill can permanently sterilize women. Now, that's not the average case, but it can. Okay. It can also take up to 2 years for those hormones to leave your body. So maybe fertility returns, but it takes a while to come back. We've also seen women at which it came back right away. So I don't know which type of person you might be, but keep in mind it's not something you can instantly change your goals on. When you're using NFP, you can say, you know what, praise God, got the promotion, let's have a baby, or let's start trying. It might be different with contraception. You might not be able to. Also, the pill is not a green thing to do. I'm not on the green bandwagon. I do believe we need to be very concerned with the environment. We need to recycle and do those types of things and be environmentally responsible. So I encourage you to believe in Catholic theology on this. But the green movement, the political green movement that is they don't have problems with contraception, but they'll tell you you're going to hell if you don't recycle that bottle of water, okay? Sadly, the pill does not break down, or artificial contraception does not break down in the water treatment system. It's artificially made from horse urine of all things. And again, the water treatment system doesn't filter this stuff out. So every drop of water we drink is laced with estrogen and progesterone. We have more and more in our drinking water, and this is something you can Google and find out information on, okay? Second of all, your fertility will diminish with age. And in our culture, we get married later in life because we're more educated than other countries are, okay? So you're most fertile in your teens and early 20s. By the time you get to your 30s, fertility is dropping. I can vouch for ourselves. Marianne and I are still fertile. We're both 38 years old, but fertility is definitely waning, okay? And we've been using NFP this whole time successfully, by the way. But as you use contraception, it ages your cervix an additional year for every year you're on hormonal contraception. So when we were on the pill, we were on it for, I believe, 4 years before we discontinued. During that time, it aged Marianne's cervix an additional 4 years. I'm not going to explain why that is. If you want to know more information, contact me and I'll explain the physiology behind all of that. But the sad heartbreak is a lot of people decide, you know what, they're going to have fun in their 20s, they get married in their 30s, and now they're all about making a baby, and that's the hardest time to conceive if they're still fertile, if they've been on the pill for a long period of time. So a gal who's been on the pill maybe for 10 years has a cervix that's about 20 years older than it should have been, okay? And also, using NFP forces you to talk about your family size. Every month when you're fertile again, you have those conversations. Is it really a bad time? For many, many years, Marianne and I had this conversation. I was going to school and working 2 jobs. And I had to tell her every single time, yes, honey, I'm sorry. It's not a good time still. We don't have any money in the bank account, so no, it's not a good time. But we talked about it every single month. And that's the important thing. We were open to God's will and we were communicating about it. Yeah, I already mentioned that. Okay, and then the last positive externality that I want to leave you with is sex became more exciting. Now, I didn't think this would happen because instinctively you think, okay, if you use NFP, you have to give up sex on certain days, which means you'll be less satisfied because you have less sex. Well, to tell you the truth, if you go to any sex therapist and you're having sex every other evening, they'll tell you, wow, what are you doing? Because no one has sex that often if they've been married more than, a year. And so if you use NFP, you're going to have at least 50% of the chart open for sex. So you're not going to lose out on you're not going to have less sex as far as quantity goes. But I had the idea that that would be the case. Now, when you're preparing for marriage, it's totally normal and healthy to be excited about the wedding night and to look forward to that. It should be something you look forward to. It's exciting, okay? But after a certain point, you've had sex many times, eventually it will become mundane and routine. Okay, it's not that it loses its pleasure, you still enjoy it, but just like anything in life, it's just not as enjoyable as the first time, or not as special because it's not the first time. Think about your favorite dessert. The first time at which you tasted it, you probably, you can probably recall that instant where you were of, oh my gosh, this is so good, I want it again. But then by the 20th time you've eaten it, you're probably halfway done with it and you don't even realize you've been eating it at all. How many times do we sit in front of the TV and we've eaten like a whole bag of chips and we're like, where did it go? Okay, the same thing is true with sex in a certain regard. But NFP renews that, because every single chart, Marianne and I have a wedding night because we abstain for a short period of time, a week and a half usually, during the fertile phase, and then we get to come back together as a married couple all over again. So every month we practice being engaged and showing love in non-genital ways, basically, during that time, and then we get to come back together for the rest of the cycle and we get to be married again, okay? So NFP actually made our sex life even more interesting. Even if you read a secular journal, sometimes they'll tell you, like even Men's Health will have tips about sex and they'll say, you know what, abstain for a couple days. It makes it that much more enjoyable, okay? I'm not going to read all of this last verse. This is what I'm leaving you with before we go over the Billings method. But 1 Corinthians 7:5 outlines acceptable times to not have sex when you're married. And basically what it says is there are certain times in your life where you're going to need to pray more and focus on your family. Okay? And these situations are the best time to abstain. And during that, but after that, you need to come back together again so that you're not tempted to do something you weren't meant to do. So as you use NFP, you're going to learn how beautiful the covenant of marriage is, about giving yourselves totally to each other and not holding anything back, even your fertility, and learning how to be responsive to the other person's needs instead of making the other person do all the work. Okay? If you have any questions, please contact your NFP teacher about this. You notice I didn't mention many Bible verses or catechism verses or anything like that. That's because this is natural law. It's meant for every woman and every man, no matter what their religion is or if they don't have one. Okay, so please ask your NFP teacher if you have any questions. You can also contact me at the diocese through email. My email address is aabadie@fwdioc.org. Or you can contact me on my cell phone, 972-746-5085. I'd recommend only using the cell phone, though, if you have to. An email would probably be better. Thank you very much, and we'll continue with the Billings method.